Hey, Jimbo, you ready for this deal?
Live action.
Old stories like long lost friends, rodeos and late night bends, history before our time, round pens and pasture rides, cowboys of the Osage.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, brought to you by the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, located in historic downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Hey, it's Cody over here, and as always, I got my main man with me, Mr. Rodeo historian himself, Jimbo Snively. Hey, Jimbo, good morning. Good to see you. Who do we have today?
Hey, good morning to you, Cody boy, and it's just another great day in the Osage. And Cody, we got Johnny Pollock with us today. He's one of the best bronc riders ever hang around this Osage County area. And he was a PRCA Gold Card member. He was Texas Circuit Champion in 1997 and 1998. And Cody, that's a big circuit. I mean, that's a big deal. That's almost like winning the world.
You know, one of his biggest accomplishments is his pictures hanging up in Bad Brad's. He's got an autographed picture hanging up in Bad Brad's. I see it every time I go in there.
He's a 14 times Texas Circuit finalist. He's a 2-time college national finalist. He's been a stunt man in the movies, just an all-around cowboy, worked at the Chapman Barnard ranch. So we got a lot to get into today. Johnny, welcome to the Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's an honor.
It's our pleasure. Where'd you grow up at, Johnny?
I grew up in the Fort Worth area. I grew up there and was involved in horses growing up, you know, and my family always had horses, and we went to amateur type events and youth events, and I was always, you know, everything around my life involved a horse one way or the other, and was fortunate enough to get to compete at the high school level in rodeo. And then right after high school, most of my friends went to college, and I went to Osage County.
What did you always like those horses that bucked, or did you like the gentle ones too?
Oh, I guess when I was that age, I liked the horses that bucked, but I didn't encourage them to buck, but it didn't bother me any. And you kind of respect that in them a little bit. Sometimes it's more of a challenge if they've got a little more try and a little more athleticism. But, you know, like if you go back to what Ray Hunt said about he was reincarnated, he said he'd be a bucking horse because they get taken care of so great. They don't work very hard as long as they do a good job. So you kind of have respect for the bucking horse and more than love them. But as far as the colts, you know, I'd like them to be gentle, but I don't want them to be so dull I can't get anything done with them.
Right.
I didn't know you were raised down there in Fort Worth, Johnny.
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah.
Ooh, I've spent me some time in Fort Worth, Jimbo. You know, right when I got out of high school, I went to work for a guy down there, Jimbo, and he put me in an apartment above a bar in Cowtown, north side there. I was 18 years old. They had a 24-hour poker game going in that apartment I was staying in.
Nothing could go wrong there.
I didn't get in any trouble.
We're not going to mention any names, I guess, Mr. Dugan.
Hey, I asked somebody down there the other day if they had ever heard of Gary Galt while they were down there, and they hadn't heard of him. So I was a little disappointed there, Johnny. But anyway, that's my good Fort Worth story, Jimbo.
Yeah. Johnny, what brought you up here to the Barnard Ranch?
Well, quite honestly, my mother was living in the area at the time, and I came to visit. And I ended up meeting a friend of hers. His name is Don James. We lost him last year. He worked on the ranch there at the Chapman Barnard, and I met him. And quite honestly, he told me the ranch had a bunch of colts that needed ridden, and the colt breaker that they had at the time was having a hell of a time staying on, and it wouldn't be hard to get hired. So I went out there and they hired me, and I went home and packed my stuff, and I made it back to Oklahoma City from Fort Worth before my truck broke down. I hitched a ride and stayed at the Chapman Barnard, and at that time I think they probably had 50 or 60 mares, and and Bill Reed's had the place. He donated all of his fillies to Cal Poly University in California, and we broke all the geldings or stud colts. But at that time, they had all the 2-year-olds that needed started, but they also hadn't gotten into their 3-year-olds or there were quite a few 4-year-olds that still had been fooled with a little bit, and then a few 5-year-olds that had never gotten broke that were pretty ranked. So I had my work cut out for me.
How many head were you working with there, Johnny?
Well, I mean, I would get them in as 15 at a time, and just kind of go through them. I think that place probably had, I bet there were 300 or 400 head of horses on there. I'd hate to guess, but I think the first year I was there, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, on up to a few 5s. I think I probably broke close to 80 head. And to decide whether they were broke enough to give to the Cowboys, you had to take them to a calf back. So they weren't 30. They were ready for them to go do something else.
About how long did that take average-wise, Johnny?
What I prefer to do, and I've learned this over the years, at that time I was an 18-year-old kid that thought you needed to just ride the snot out of them. As I've gotten older and a little bit smarter, in a perfect world, I would ride those 2-year-olds 10 times and turn them out, get them up in 90 days, ride them another 15 or 20 times, and then kind of forget about them. And then as they got to be 3-year-olds, then start using them. So I would say that, over the course of a year, they would probably have 100 to 120 rides on them sporadically. If they could take it, if they wanted to be ranked, they didn't get any days off.
Right.
If they could take the days off, you gave it to them, and I think it kind of helped them. The better colts and the better minded colts, I think it would help them absorb it better.
How many Cowboys were working up there at that ranch when you were working up there, Johnny?
Probably a dozen, and then we had some guys that came in and they helped. I mean, if we went on a big cattle gathering, there could be 15 or 20 guys out there. It was quite an experience for a kid from Fort Worth, Texas, to show up and see 1,000 head of crossbred cows in front of him. It was great. I loved it, and got to work with some great guys. Larry Carpenter was the foreman, and his brother Danny was there. Again, John Barnes was there at the place. I think at the time maybe he was partnered with some cattle or something with Bill Reed's, and his horsemanship skills are out of this world. I don't know if you know who he is, of course, Cody, but
Jimbo knows who John Barnes is for sure.
Yeah, we know him.
But for whatever reason, he took me under his wing at that time, and I was, again, I'm an 18-year-old kid, and I think the only thing he saw in me was the only thing that kept my job around there was that I could stay on, because I couldn't teach one to stop or turn around. I could rope just good enough to get myself in a mess, and again, like I said, my friends went to college, and I got more of an education there in Osage County in a couple of years than I ever would have at Texas A&M.
Were you aware at the time of the great history up there at that ranch? Did you know anything about that?
Well, I knew quite a bit about it because there was a book there, and I read about the Chapman and Barnard partnership. I'm kind of a history buff, and it talked about them even when they broke ground on the place. I can't remember the exact years, but it was in the teens or early 1900s, and then I got to read quite a bit about it, but then that history lived on as far as like Ben Johnson running the ranch, and then his your son living there and stuff. You know a lot of that history, and I tell you what's kind of funny, the history of the traditions that they have there that some people wouldn't even think about. And I like telling this story because it is sort of a funny tradition that I wasn't aware of at the time on that place. Of course, I walked in the door. First week we were there, we were working cattle, and so we were eating lunch at the pen. And then the first week that we actually went to lunch at the bunkhouse, we walk in, meal's ready. Everybody gets their tea and sits down at the long table, and I just picked the first empty seat I saw, and I sat down there. And by then those guys, Cowboys, had gotten to like me a little bit, and they told me and said, "You need to move." I said, "Move? What do I need to move?" Okay, I just picked the first seat. I'm kind of stuck out of water there. He said, "That's Larry's seat." I said, "Okay." So I got up and moved, thankfully. Well, the next young kid that showed up at the ranch, they didn't care as much for him, and they let him sit there for about 3 days before they told him. And by then, he was fixing water gaps every afternoon for a week. So he didn't sit in that seat, and I don't think he sat there when Ben Johnson ran it either. It's probably the same table.
Probably not. Did you stay in the bunkhouse?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I stayed in the bunkhouse, and I'm sure you've been out there and seen it. John Barnes and I were talking about it a couple of days ago. Not much about that headquarters has changed other than it's clean.
Right.
And if you walk when you walk through the yard gate, they're on the right now. I think they've got some bathrooms and stuff. There's a basement underneath there, and that was the only shower in the whole place. So we showered in the basement, and I'll go on to say that it was probably at least 10 inches of mold on the walls and the ceiling, but that's where we showered.
Wow!
And you didn't shower without your sandals on.
Sounds like showering at the showers at Cheyenne after the carny's been there, Jimbo.
A little bit like that, yes. I've been there too, but it was an experience, and like I said, we got to ride a lot of really good horses. I think the better horses that Bill raised probably were in those mares' bellies when they left, but he was definitely building a hell of a horse program at the time.
What do you think of the winters up there?
Sir?
What do you think of the winter weather up there?
I didn't like it at all.
I bet you
didn't like it at all. No, sir. As a matter of fact, they bought me a real heavy coat for Christmas because I think they were scared I was going to leave and they wasn't going to get any more of those colts broke. And I came close to it. I remember being so cold, and they talk about it being hot here where I live in South Texas, but it's not. It's still hot there too. It's just not as humid down here as it is there.
Right, right. The wind seems like the wind always blows up there at the Barnard. And
yeah, if you get on top of those hills, it does.
Yeah.
But we kept all of the horses over there at what would be the Blackland side of the place.
Right.
Where now they've built some houses and stuff. But that horse facility was there when I was there in 1989, and was a good facility. And then across country there to the headquarters, it's just somewhere around 5 miles, give or take. But I would keep 2 colts at the headquarters at all times, and I would ride a colt in the morning to the horse barn, ride colts all morning, swap colts and ride back at lunch, and then swap colts and ride back to the headquarters and ride in the afternoon. So in the process of that, I was putting 20 miles on those colts, and I very rarely even drove a vehicle. It was just back and forth getting those horses riding. So,
did you ever ride up to that place on Buck Creek? I wonder how far that was.
I've been all over it. Yes, sir. Yeah, they would. I've been. There's one piece of it that was the Kansas Trap. I think they called that pasture that went right over into the Kansas line just a little bit.
Yep.
We've been talking about this ranch, Jimbo, and it's a famous ranch. Do you have any history on it, or can you explain what this ranch was to everybody so they know what we're talking about, actually?
So many great cowboys worked up there, world champions and stuff. My grandfather worked up there. Lewis Brooks worked up there. Ike Rude worked up there. So many cowboys came through this area and would would work at the Chapman Barnard Ranch. It was just a historic ranch, without, set aside the Ben Johnson living there, it was a historic ranch without that.
In the 1940s, it was the largest ranch in the whole state of Oklahoma.
Right.
That's saying something right there.
Right.
Big ranch in a state like this.
Oh, I know it. It's an awesome place, and I don't know how it is now, but just a few years ago, they still had a lot of those old Bodock fence posts and stuff that were put in back there in the 20s and 30s. It just stayed the same, probably as much as any ranch that I've ever been around.
What's going on with it now, Jimbo?
Well, part of it they made into the Nature Conservancy, the Buffalo Ranch.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's where all the buffalo are.
And then that on the west side is Bass Brothers, and some of the north is Bass Brothers. But they split it up, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so the Nature Conservancy, where all the buffalo are. The tall grass prairie is what they call it.
Yeah, right. And then the other part is Bass Brothers. They run steers, yearlings.
Okay. Yeah, I heard they still have all the original count books from the original Chapman Barnard Ranch and everything the Bass Brothers do.
Yeah, they've got that there at Blackland where the old Blackland pens used to be. Well, the pens are still there, but it's not like it used to be. The Midland Valley Railroad used to go through there. And they said at one time they shipped more cattle out of there than any place in the United States.
Do you hear about that Blackland Railroad over there, Johnny?
Yes, sir. I think that's kind of what splits the Chapman and the Barnard side of the ranch, if I'm not mistaken, because where the old railroad bed is right to I'd say to the west of it, and straight west of those Blackland pens is where the horse barn was that I did most of my time at the ranch.
Yeah, the great Lewis Brooks, all-around hand. He was a colt breaker there for a while.
Yeah.
You want to hear a funny Lewis Brooks story, and I can't say that it's true because I'm too young to know it, but there was an old man named Carl Kelly. He's from up there.
Yeah,
I
know him. Or knew him. He died.
Carl, yes, I figured he'd passed away by now. Matter of fact, I heard that he had. Carl told me a funny story one time about Lewis Brooks. And he said that Lewis came to help him work cattle up there north of the ranch, and he provided him a horse, and he told him, he said, Lewis, he said, this horse is going to buck. He said, he bucks hard. He said, Lewis told him, he said, well, I'm a Bronc riding SOB. He said, well, that's going to come in handy because he really bucks, Lewis. And he said, yeah, that's good. So I told you, I'm a Bronc rider. He said he got on him, he threw him off, and Lewis Brooks got up and looked at Carl Kelly. He said, well, always was a better bull rider anyway.
He was a pretty good Bronc rider, world champion.
Yeah.
Lewis
he was. But everybody gets bucked off.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Ike Rude, they said he worked up there a long time.
Yeah. And my grandfather, he worked up there in the 1930s, and he got married in 1930. He was living in the bunkhouse, and he got married in 1936. And they wanted him to move in that ranch up there at Buck Creek with his wife, and he said, no, I've had it. I'm going to start rodeoing. But he quit that day when he got married.
Well, the cowboy crew we had there when I was there, I would have to brag on that. Everybody that worked there at the time, like I said, I mentioned the Carpenter boys and John Barnes, but a man named Johnny Brizendine was a hell of a hand. And, of course, in y'all's part of the world, everybody knows the Foreman boys.
Sure.
Bogue Foreman. He was there at the time. And a guy named Stan Malden was a hell of a hand and a good rodeo guy too. There's some good hands there. Like I said, we buried Don James last year, and he was probably the most talented ranch cowboy I'd ever seen, and to this day. But I drive through there every time I go, and nothing seems to change. Like I said, other than it's cleaner. Some of the fences are gone.
Yeah. Yeah, it stayed the same about as much as close to any ranch I know of. Pretty cool. Well, you broke broncs up there. What made you, I guess just a natural progression to go to the rodeos?
Well, I've mentioned college a couple times. After I left Chapman Barnard, I went to work with Paul and Marcella Mays there. I started colts for them and trained horses with them for another year, and then worked for them for another year after that. But in between working for Paul and Marcella, I decided that going to college wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was right out of high school, and went to school at Uvalde Southwest Texas Junior College. Roy Angermiller was the coach down there. He's a steer roper. Been to the finals a bunch. And I just kind of pursued my rodeo deal from there, and then used what I'd learned at the Chapman Barnard and made a living starting colts.
Who all was on your college rodeo team with you?
Tony Reyna, Scott Snedeker, Joaquin Garza, Joe Vargas. There's a lot of good hands on there. Ryan Barnes, Ryan Miller.
I heard a story one time. You might have been there. Roy Angermiller, he was a great steer roper.
On what side of the border it was on, Cody?
You
on what side of the border?
Yeah, I don't know. I've made a lot of memories on that south side of the border. I just don't remember any of them, to be honest with you. I was having too much fun. But anyway, Roy Angermiller, he's a great steer roper. Just a great roper. Pretty good guy, all-around guy. But I heard Tony Reyna, he was a hot-shot calf roper at the time, Jimbo. He's a steer roper now. Right. But he was limping off to Roy Angermiller about being able to beat him in a match calf roping or something. And
I flagged it.
Okay, tell us about that then. You were there. I wasn't there. I've just heard the story second-handed, and I was about 10 years old when I heard it. So,
well, I flagged it. Tony's one of my great friends. I love him to death, and I look up to Roy Angermiller more than you can imagine. As ornery as he is, if you could hang around him a while, you'd learn how to win. But Roy and Tony had a trailer trade, and in that trade, Tony owed Roy $500, I believe. And we were all a bunch of college kids, and Roy was still going to the finals in the steer open at the time, but nobody thought he could rope calves. Tony sure didn't think he could beat him roping calves. So they matched for the 500 in their college practice den, and they tied the calves first, and Tony ties one in 8 or 9, and Roy ties one 11 or 12. Tony tied one 11. I think Roy tied one in 10. Tony was beating him when the calf roping match was over, but it wasn't by very much. And after Roy ran his first 2 in the tripping, Tony didn't even need to back in the box again. But long story short, when the dust settled, Tony gave Roy $1,000.
That's some of that. Roy Angermiller might have been the one that told me about this. He said, "Old age and treachery overcomes youth and enthusiasm." Jimbo,
right? It usually will.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe Roy.
Some of them old guys are just hard to beat. They just are almost impossible.
Well, and since we're talking about Osage County, whenever I was living up there, Sunday afternoon, there wasn't anything to do but go watch the steer open somewhere. And we were at Bartlesville at a little steer open. Wasn't much to it, but when it was over, they wanted to have a match. Sean Burchett was going to match your dad. Going to match Rocky.
Gotcha.
Yeah. J. Paul Williams' dad came over to me. Nobody knew me, and I was just some kid, and he said, "Hey, who do you think's going to win?" And I said, "Well, I think I'll bet on Rocky." And he said, "I would too." He said, "But nobody will take any of my bets. They won't bet against me." And he hands me a stack of hundreds. And I walk around there, and I get every bet I could on Rocky, and Rocky ended up winning it. I'm about the youth and enthusiasm part. Rocky beat him.
I'm not sure if he beat him, but I think he covered the seconds that you guys got on the deal.
Yeah. He got the money. I got the money. I know that much.
That's all that matters.
I know Alan Lansdowne told us that story here a while back. He said, dang, he about beat him, but he covered the spread.
Yeah.
But now after being in Uvalde, then I was there on a rodeo scholarship, and I still kept roots in Husker, but my rodeo career, I traveled all over the United States and Canada and tried to make finals, and then starting colts and training horses and putting on a few horse clinics along the way. But I had quite a bit of success in the rodeo deal, and at the Texas level, and almost made the final several times. I had a couple of broken legs that sent me home, but it was, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Now I'm in Bandera, Texas, working the oil field and selling snow cones.
Who did you travel with, Johnny?
I traveled, when I first started wanting to go to professional rodeos, I was staying at John Barnes's, and Don Reno.
Oh yeah,
Don Reno came over there. Oh yeah, good bucking horse guy. John and I are still great friends, and John was helping some guys learn to trip steers, and Don showed up at the house getting some coaching, and he saw my Bronc saddle sitting in the tack room, and we got to visiting, and I jumped in the truck with him that summer and filled my permit. And then first guy that I rodeoed with hard professionally was Tom Reeves. And then
world champion.
Then I rodeoed several years with Mike Uthier. That's always entertaining.
One of my favorite people of all time, Mike Uthier, no doubt about it.
Yeah, if you want to talk to somebody, tell you some stories, you got to get him on that.
Well, we're trying to. You told me you were going to give me his wife's phone number so she'd make him do it.
I can tell you some Mike Uthier stories, but I'd rather not. I'll let him do that.
What about traveling with Tom? What was it like traveling with Tommy Reeves? Did you learn a lot traveling with a guy like that?
You learned a lot about. You learned a lot about the entering. He'd been there for so long and done so much. You learned. I mean, that guy could tell you. He could figure out how to work 2 rodeos in one day when nobody thought it was possible. I mean, maybe he might be in Pecos in the afternoon and be in California that night. Just time changes and flights and when to enter, when they were going to have the good horses out. And he's a master of that. And honestly, I liked his style as far as his riding style compared to others at the time. I liked the way he handled his rein. And I tried to handle my rein like that, but I never did handle it as good as Tommy. And, as far as you learned a lot, but he's grouchy. So sometimes when you're a young kid and you're rodeoing with some older guys, and they're grouchier than they need to be just to piss you off, but that's part of life.
I think it rubbed off on Johnny. He's a little grouchy sometimes, Jimbo.
Did you do much flying to rodeos, Johnny?
I didn't fly very much. I pretty much drove and got. Well, I mean, as far as commercially, yeah, I flew every day,
right.
But for every chance I got commercially, but I didn't. I flew a few times in a small plane. One time, I caught a ride with Ty Murray and a real nice plane, the Gulfstream. And other than that, just commercial. I didn't have a little plane or anything like that.
Yeah. I don't blame you. I don't like those little planes with cowboy pilots.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of good stories from some cowboy pilots on this show, haven't we, Jimbo?
Yeah, we have.
Don Huddleston, he landed his plane right in front of the rodeo grounds, let Roy Cooper off. We had a few Roy Cooper plane stories, actually.
Well, my first wife wouldn't allow me to get a pilot's license. She thought I had too much risky behavior to begin with.
Yeah, these rough stock riders flying these airplanes, there ain't no way I'd get in one of those with them, Jimbo. No. I mean, they're crazy enough anyway, getting on these bulls and stuff. But getting behind a wheel of a plane on top of it, I just can't imagine.
Yeah, and you just landed on your head at a rodeo and then go try to fly an airplane.
They got a death wish in the first place.
Right. Well, I don't know. If I win the lottery, I'm going to buy a plane and give it to my son.
Yes, sir, for sure. Let's talk about your boy there for a minute. I imagine you're one proud daddy.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with his accomplishments. I mean, he's a very talented artist and leather craftsman to begin with, but he didn't want to work for me running a chainsaw, so he figured out how to.
Well, he saw you making them snow cones, and somehow you're a snow cone artist, and he turned into a leather artist.
Something like that, but
yeah.
But no, he's pretty talented on both ends of the arena. Actually, he qualified for that first national final steer open that they had last week, but he didn't get to go because he dislocated his shoulder, and he's headed to the college national finals here in about 10 days. So he's doing well. Ride's really good.
Hey, let's touch on that college national final steer open for a minute, Jimbo. What's going on with that? Have you read anything about that deal?
Well, just what little I've read on Facebook and stuff. I really don't know that much about it, Cody.
Well, I think that college rodeo's finally taken in the sport of steer open, and they're going to crown, or they did crown, a national champion here just recently.
Yeah, I saw that.
Have they had the college national final steer open yet? Was that
Yes,
last
they had
weekend
it
at Clarendon?
Clarendon.
Okay.
They had it Clarendon Monday. I didn't get any results on it. Like I said, Will didn't go, but I think it's been a good deal. I think Don Ed, Edelman, and I think Mr. Tierney, yes, I think they've really been the instigators behind a lot of that.
Yeah, that's what I've got, too, out of the deal. Looks like Jess and Don Ed, and maybe Bryce is helping a little bit with it, seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, so
It's about time.
I think it's a good deal. Yeah, I mean, they got to do something to make that sport grow. And, people think that it won't help it, but it really will. And I can give you an example. Whenever I was a kid growing up in Texas, you couldn't learn to ride a saddle bronc. There was a bareback rigging on every feed store, but you couldn't learn to ride broncs. Monty Henson and Bobby Brown were the only Texas bronc riders, and we didn't have anybody to teach us, didn't have anywhere to go. And at the time, it reflected into the PRCA. There was probably 35 or 40 guys that were really trying to make the national finals at that time. Now there's 150 guys trying to make the finals, and you can give that to a lot of the credit of the guys like the Bowers putting on schools and getting. I mean, saddle bronc riding is the toughest event to learn to do and the easiest to do once you get it figured out. But getting through that first year without any help, it kills a lot of people off. And now it's just evolved, and I think the steer open can be the same way with a little bit of help and and a little guidance. Maybe they could help the sport grow.
What makes a saddle bronc riding stirrups so dangerous? You always hear people saying, that's one of the most dangerous parts of saddle bronc riding. What makes it so dangerous for the stirrups on a saddle bronc saddle?
Well, they're narrow and they're the main thing, in my opinion, makes your stirrups dangerous on saddle bronc saddles if you don't have very good boots. Your boots have to be narrow toed before you can get away from them. But you learn how to do it. They don't. It never really crosses your mind when you're competing.
So if you get your foot hung in the stirrup, what's the best way to get it out?
Just roll over and land on your belly and step on your back instead of getting hung up further and dragged, because your toes sticking straight up, it'll stay in that stirrup. But as it turns over, it'll pop out.
How'd you break your leg, Johnny?
Sir?
How'd you break your leg at the rodeo?
I broke my leg the first time at Mesquite, and it was just kind of a funky deal. My right spur hung in his neck, and all my weight landed on the end of that spur and broke it. And then the next time was at Calgary, and the bad part of that is I think I was 8th or 9th in the world, and pretty much had the finals made. And I had Wyatt Earp at Calgary as the bucking horse of the year in Canada, and actually he's the sire to all those great bucking horses that they talk about, graded coconut and stuff like that. They didn't ride him very much, and he bucked me off and broke my leg there and sent me home, and I didn't go to the finals. But in the process of that, I got to do a lot of interesting things, and I went on rodeo quite a while after that and almost made them the following year. But right before I broke my leg, and Cody was asking me yesterday about that, doing that stunt double deal for Clint Black on a movie about a bronc rider that was he was incarcerated for murder, and was falsely accused, and it was a dang good story. There was a lot of fun stuff that we didn't make in the movie, but the guy was. If you're a history buff and you want to look for it, I think it's called "Still Holding On: The Legend of Cadillac Jack or something like that.
Yeah, there's a good book out there too called "In Jack's Favor." You can find on.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, the book is "In Jack's Favor," and the movie was right. Was what you said. But
well, that was a lot of fun. He was accused of murder. In case somebody reads the book or sees the movie, I won't mess it up. But he was accused of murder and was sent to Angola prison, Louisiana, and the process of that, did a lot of good as far as I think he helped with the prison rodeo, maybe started Cowboys for Christ and things like that. For us, it was a good deal because for a bunch of broke rodeo cowboys, we were making really good money hanging around movie set, not doing a whole lot, but riding stuff at buck. So we enjoyed it.
How'd you get picked for that, Johnny?
I had a friend that had worked with that Lone Wolf McQuaid series, not Texas Ranger. A lot of it was filmed there in Fort Worth, and they just had a call, and somebody called me. They needed somebody that could ride and stand around more than anything. But after I was there for about 2 or 3 days, then Clint and I got to be pretty good friends, and he gave me the right to be a creative consultant, so they wouldn't mess anything up that didn't look time period. As far as this was all set in the 70s, I wanted to make sure that it didn't look like something in the 90s. Well, for instance, I had to stop filming once because there was a bunch of bull riding vests hanging on the back of the chute, and it would just look stupid in the movie. And Clint and I, because I could tell him stuff like that, we got to be pretty good friends.
Yeah.
What'd you do? Run out on the set? Stop it all.
Yeah, I did. I just
Get
said
them
cut.
vests down here. You just start throwing these damn bull riders.
Cut.
Yeah. But the funny one on that deal is that those Hollywood guys, they drive us crazy because they set up to film a scene, and they're there for 30 minutes getting all this stuff set up, and it takes 5 minutes to film the scene, and they go somewhere else and set up. They come back and reset up where we just were. So we're just hanging around making day wages, and they had to pay us so much ahead to get on a Bronc. And then if we got bucked off on purpose, they had to pay us double. So they asked me to jump off one and not use any pickup man. I said, well, that's paying double. And they said, no, we don't want you to get bucked off. We just want you to jump off. And I said, well, can't you come back here and climb on this Bronc and you show me the difference? I said, just pay him. Just pay him. But the funny story I like to tell about that is just to show how naive people are that aren't involved in the rodeo or agriculture world. The director went to Mr. Lynn Bottoms, who was a stock contractor, and he asked him, he said, sir, he said, I need a bull that's going to jump out here and spin about twice, throw the guy off and chase him to the fence where I'm going to have a camera set up. And Mr. Bottoms looked at him and he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk back here and visit with these bulls, see if I can find one that's willing to do all that shit. And that director looked him straight in the eyes. He said, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And he really believed he could do it, but it worked out. I got it on film. So,
What kind of guy was Clint Black?
He's a real nice man. He was a little bit bashful at first whenever, being around the Cowboys and stuff, because, they had his wife was in the movie. So there's Mac Davis, the old country singer. He was there.
Oh yeah. It's hard to be humble.
Yeah. That guy was a hoot. But
North Dallas 40, that's my favorite one Mac was in. Yep. North Dallas 40. I love that show.
Yep.
Sorry, Johnny.
Yeah, he was pretty funny. A couple of the guys that were on our Cowboy crew were in the back drinking beer, and Mac, he picked his head up and he said, I smell bourbon. And I said, no, they're back there drinking beer. He said, well, He said, I hadn't had a drink in 25 years, but every time I smell alcohol, it still smells like bourbon. But Clint was a good guy. At first, he was pretty bashful, and he walked up to us the first night we met him, and he said, hey, now, we really want this to be as realistic as possible. I want everything to look, right. Y'all are the Cowboys. We want your advice. And one of our friends there, Jimmy McCarley, he's pretty bold. He's quite the character sometimes.
Great guy.
He takes Clint Black's hat off of his head and creases it on his knee and puts it back on his head. And he said, well, Clint, there's a start.
Yeah.
And after that, he kind of warmed up to us and was good. He gave me an envelope the day we left, and he said, I'd like to take you guys to dinner or drinks and have a good time and stuff. He said, but I can't go anywhere without being bothered. And he said, I want y'all to go have fun. And I think there was 5 of us, and he gave me an envelope with $6,000 on it.
Wow.
And
did y'all have a heck of a time that night?
Honestly, we split it up and paid the rent and met later at Northside and drank some beer.
Northside, that's the stockyards in Fort Worth. That's the cowboy lingo for it, Jimbo.
But after that, then Clint instigated a deal for me to get a sponsorship with AC Delco. And that was when I was making the final, or, had a good shot to make the finals. And I was kind of shocked because it's sort of like, why me? But I'd helped him enough. And it was a substantial amount of money. Well, I don't mind saying, this was in 1998, and it was for $50,000 a year. It was a 3-year contract. And I was rodeoing, and Clint, he played at Houston, and he invited me to come up to his dressing room. And we kind of made the deal. But while I was up there, I got to meet a guy named Billy Gibbons. I don't know if anybody knows who Billy Gibbons is, but
ZZ Top.
Yeah. So got to hang out up there with them, and we made the deal. And I rodeoed all summer and never got any shirts or anything from them. And hadn't really come up with a dollar figure, but the number we were kicking around was 50,000. And I got a call from home, a $25,000 check had showed up in the mail on the 4th of July, or the 5th of July. I broke my leg on the 6th. Ooh. And called Clint and told him, hey, I broke my leg. I'm not coming back. And I said, I'll send you this check back. And he said, no. He said, you need it more than I do. He said, keep it. Call me in January. So he's that kind of person. He made that kind of deal. And even though I didn't feel like I did anything to earn the money. I didn't do any sponsor work for him or anything, but he was a man of his word and turned out good for everybody.
When he broke his leg, Jimbo, it was before the Cowboy Channel or anything, and somehow the Calgary Stampede ended up on national TV that year, and they showed it in slow motion. Johnny breaking his leg in half. It was horrible. We were all feeling bad for him.
Yeah, it's pretty bad when you're going to make the finals, and that's your dream, to make the finals, and have something like that happen. That's a tough break. Yeah,
I was living down in Fort Worth, working with his brother, of all people. That's how I got acquainted with Johnny. Johnny, why didn't you ever start roping steers? I've seen you in about 1,000 steer ropings. I hadn't seen you actually enter one.
I roped some steers when I was there in Alaska and went to the Osage Opens. I'm left-handed, and I was learning to rope right-handed at the time. And I love it. I loved entering, but I had a couple good horses and sold them. And I'll be honest with you, I can't justify the investment for the reward. I love the steer open, but to go put up that kind of money for me, it's hard. And it's hard for my son sometimes too, because he goes to the rodeos and rides Broncs and puts up $100 and wins 3,000, and he goes to steer open and puts up 500. He's like, hell, Dad, this isn't as bad. This is a bad investment. I said, well, this is maybe something you'll think about when you get older.
Well,
So,
if you're roping good, it's all right. Your old college guy, Scott Snedeker, he thinks it's a pretty good investment right now. Holy moly, he's tearing them up.
oh yeah, I know Scott. You ought to get him on there. He's pretty funny. But yeah, no, he's always done well with it. And trust me, I'm not knocking the steer over, but the answer why I never really got serious about Aaron is just I couldn't justify the entry fees, and quite honestly, probably didn't rope good enough to beat anybody. Now I rope with my right hand, have for 20 years, but everybody says, you ought to go. My brother, every now and then, he'll say something to me, I ought to go to the old timers roping. And I said, well, hell, I couldn't beat Scott Snedeker when I was in college. I couldn't beat Rocky Patterson. I mean, Dan Fisher, what is he, 68 years old?
No, he's 72.
Okay, I couldn't
He's
beat
still
him.
roping as good as he ever had. He was sticking it on the other day at Claremore fast as anybody. He had some heck on the ground, but he had 3 down quick.
Yep.
So why do I want to enter an old man's roping when I can't beat him? That's what I'm thinking.
He don't even enter old man's ropings.
I know my limitations. I don't rope good enough.
It always surprised me. His brother roped steers. His mentor, John Barnes, he roped steers. All the guys he hung out with were steer ropers a lot of times. Johnny,
Cody,
every time he had a lot of advice for me on roping steer. God dang, you did this, boy. Want to do this, to do. Some of it actually helped.
Quarterback.
Some of it actually helped. I'm not even kidding you.
I'm a great armchair quarterback. No, I love the steer open. And I've started lots of steer horses and had some success, but just like I said, I love it. I'd love to see a guy go win the Lenderman Award that's roping steers and riding broncs.
Well, your boy might do it.
Well, he's got the ability, you know.
Why don't you tell Uthier to come out of retirement for just a few broncs, enough to win a little money?
Well, the bad thing is he could do it.
Yeah.
He might be able to. He's come out of retirement pretty quick, as good a shape as he stays in.
Where you living at now, Johnny?
Where am I living?
Yeah.
I live in Bandera.
Oh, that's a good cowboy town right there.
Well, it's kind of a tourist town. You know, they call it a cowboy town, but it's a really good town for the tourists. And kind of they've got trail riders and stuff like that. I laugh and people say something about it being a cowboy capital. I said, yeah, there's the few cowboys that are left around here either welding or selling snow cones.
What do you do in the oil field, Johnny? You mentioned the oil field there a while ago.
I'm a land agent. I acquire surface rights as far as easements, pipeline agreements, things like that. Right.
That's a pretty good job. That's better than getting out there welding or climbing around on those pulling units or something like that.
Yeah. I'm pretty content with. It's kind of like trading horses, only you're doing it with an oil company's money.
Yeah, you bet.
Kind of like trading horses.
I was a welder in the oil field for 38 years, and
oh, really?
Yeah. I like the oil field, but that landman's a pretty good job.
I enjoy it, and like I said, it's been good to my family. As most everybody knows, that youth rodeo and kid rodeo is an expensive game to play, and I have a daughter named Lainey that she rodeoed. She's in Stephenville now, and still ropes and a little bit, and plays with the barrel race a little bit, but and of course my son. And you haul 2 kids down the road with a trailer full of horses, you got to have a good time.
Absolutely.
Sell a lot of Tiger's Blood snow cones too.
Sure.
You bet.
You were telling us something about the Bandera Rodeo before we got started on the podcast. What was that? Something about selling snow cones at the rodeo. He said he made more money before the grand entry is over than he ever did riding there, and he won it a couple times.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, you know, how much cold, sweet stuff you can sell in a hot town.
There you go.
I'm not asking for any trade secrets, but what's the 3 most popular flavors of snow cone?
Tiger's Blood.
Told you, Jimbo. Tiger's Blood.
Tiger's Blood, coconut, strawberry.
Coconut?
And the funny thing is, yeah, Tiger's Blood, coconut, strawberry. The thing is, coconut, strawberry, or Tiger's Blood is coconut mixed together. That's all it is. I didn't trade secrets on this day.
When are you going to add funnel cakes in on the deal?
No,
That's
I'm
when I'm
not.
going to head down there.
No, I'm not. I said I want to, so I can be a real carny.
You need a corn dog, I can tell.
That's right.
Well, Johnny, why don't you ask him the question, Jimbo? We hadn't asked it in a while on the podcast about your Mount Rushmore.
Johnny, if you were building a Mount Rushmore of bronc riders, who would you put on it? Need 4 names. They don't have to be guys you rodeoed with. They could be back in the 20s or 30s for that matter. But who do you think deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of saddle bronc riders?
I can just pick 4.
Yep. That's it.
4. Well,
4 and no more.
I don't know. I'm going to have to say
Who?
Billy Bauer.
Oh, yeah.
Brad Germanson. Clint Johnson.
Who was the first one?
Casey Tibbs.
There you go.
Casey, Billy Etbauer, Brad Germanson, Clint Johnson.
Yeah, and then I think Roddy Hay should get an honorable mention.
He's on the Mount Rushmore in Canada, the Canada Rushmore.
Yeah, I think he should probably fall in there.
He was an electric guy for years. Everyone loved to watch Roddy Hay, and his boys now, holy moly, those kids of his, they're really
amazing.
coming on.
Yeah. They're amazing. You know, Rod never won the world down here, but he, as far as his skills, he's phenomenal. He can turn his toes out better than anybody I've ever seen. And then there's Billy. I think Billy's probably the most phenomenal bronc rider that ever lived. But there's a kid right now that if he keeps doing what he's doing, he could be in that class. It's a kid named Sage Newman. Kid rides great. But I've got to stick with little Clint and Brad and Billy. And of course, Casey, he gets it because none of us be even having a conversation more than like it was Casey Tibbs.
Well, there's something wrong with you if you don't put Casey Tibbs on that bronc riding Mount Rushmore.
We wouldn't. I mean, as far as history goes, we wouldn't have an NFR.
He was the most electric personality in rodeo still might be. Casey Tibbs. We heard a good story on him last week's podcast from Farrell Butler, the old photographer. He said Casey he used to stay in this boarding house in California, and this old woman would tell him, "Well, Casey, you can stay here this year, but no women." And Casey bought a whole big bag full of panties and bras and everything, brand new from the store. And he'd hang one on the door, throw it in the hallway out there every morning. And she'd say, "Casey, I told you, no women in this boarding house." So,
I got to meet Casey once when I was a kid at one of the Ben Johnson celebrity deals that he had. And he was wearing a purple satin shirt. He was pretty old by then, but he was doing those when Ben had those celebrity cuttings and team ropings and whatnot.
Did you ever meet Ben?
I met him one time. I was working for Paul Mays, and I was at home. It was hot, and somebody knocked on my door, and I looked outside, and it was Ben Johnson. I told my wife, I said, "You're not going to believe this. Ben Johnson sitting on the porch." And she knew who he was, kind of, even though she was raised in South Texas. She knew who he was. And I invited him in. He said, "No, come outside. I want to talk to you." I thought, hell, I don't even know you. Why you want to talk to me? And he was quizzing me about horses that we had for sale, and this horse and that horse, and rope horses. And what he'd basically done is snuck out there to the ranch when Paul wasn't there to talk to me, because he said, "I'd rather talk to the guy riding than the one that owns him." But nothing against Paul, but that was just kind of Ben sneaking around trying to find him some horses to swap with.
That's a pretty good one.
That's
Jimbo,
the only time I met him.
One time I took a horse breaking job. Took these 2 mules in. There was a guy, he had a big mule operation up there in Kansas named Cy Coakley. I took these 2 mules in, and he had about 100 more he wanted us to break, but wanted to start off with these 2. Well, we kept these 2 around for 45 days. And I only got on them about once because they were pretty waspy mules. Anyway, my dad got sick of them standing around there at the house. I said, boys, you got to do something with these mules. So he said, how about y'all saddle these mules up and ride them to Cy's house, and by the time you get there, they'll be broke. It's 30 miles over there to his house. I made it about 10 miles, got off my mule to get a drink of water, Jimbo. Sucker wouldn't let me back on, kicked me and ran off, and that's the last time I saw that mule and that saddle. That's
your colt breaking day.
That's my colt breaking stuff. The other mule, they got him at the Grand Canyon on trail rides now.
Well, if you'd have stuck with horses, you might have been all right, not mules.
Well, yeah. Desperate times call for desperate measures, Jimbo. And that's what.
Well, it's easy to talk about all the times you stayed on one, or that you won first, or that you were 90, but it wouldn't really be fair to not talk about the times that you got bucked off. I was fortunate; I didn't get bucked off very many saddle horses. Of course, everybody gets bucked off in the bronc riding, but saddle horses I didn't fall off of very often. And I told this story the other day, made me remember it. But John, at the time I was at Chapman Barnard, Bill had the Cotting Ranch leased, which that's where the Pioneer Woman, where Drummond has all their stuff, that portion of the place.
They invented artificial insemination right there at the Cotting Ranch, Jimbo.
Right.
But anyway, we went over there to get some cattle, and I had one of those big 5-year-olds I talked about before that had kind of been a misfit around there, maybe gotten away with a little stuff. And I wanted to get there early and get him rode around before the whole crew showed up. So me and Stan Malden and Bogue Foreman left a little early, and I got on that colt and trotted him around, and he bucked me off. He bucked me off really hard. Again, I was 18 years old, and I was pretty cocky. And I thought, well, you son of a gun, and I got mad and got back on him, and I reeled the bridle reins out to him and spurred him as hard as I could, and this time he really bucked me off. And when I got up, I was hurting. When I got up, I crawled back up on him, and I gathered them bridle reins up as short as I could. And I begged him to walk off, and me and him got along for about an hour. And after that, he got mad. He never did make it as a ranch horse, but he did manage to buck me off twice in about 5 seconds.
We're laughing at you. Ain't cowboys, ain't we something? Because if we see someone get bucked off, our first thing is to do is laugh at them at first.
Yeah,
we don't even see if they're all right first a lot of times.
Right.
Well, of course. You're supposed to laugh.
It's funny.
I don't know how many times I've seen a cowboy cause someone to get bucked off and just think it's hilarious. So, but anyway, Johnny, thanks for coming on today. We sure appreciate it.
All right. Well, I hope I've answered all your questions.
Well, tell Will good luck. Get healed up and win some money.
All right. Sounds good. Maybe I'll see you Father's Day. I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, get on up here.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you. See you, Johnny.
Johnny Snow Cone Pollock right there.
Right.
Holy moly.
That was good.
And if you're down in Bandera, go buy a snow cone off Johnny. He needs it. He could really use it.
Dang right.
The extra business.
Get you some of that tiger's blood.
That's right. Get you a tiger's blood. He'll mix up any kind of concoction you want. You can get a suicide if you want. That's a little bit of everything in there, Jimbo. All right,
well, if you're real sweet to the boss, we can really spice it up for you. You got to talk about that behind the trailer.
See, he's still acting like he's lived in Oklahoma, Jimbo.
Right.
All right, everyone. Be sure to like, share, all that fun stuff. And it sure means a lot to me and Jimbo, and we'll see y'all next week.
Take care. Thank you.
See you, Johnny.
Bye.
Old stories like long lost friends, rodeos and late night bends. history before our time. Round pens and pasture rides, cowboys of the Osage.